Welcome to the folks that are just joining. We'll get started in a few minutes. Welcome to those who are newly joining. We will get started in a minute. Thanks for joining us today on our webinar, Behind the Curtain, How to Apply for SMFM Committees. My name is Carrie Wade. I'm the Chief Public Affairs Officer with the Society. And I want to start by welcoming Dr. Joanne Stone, SMFM's president, to say a few words.
Thank you so much, Carrie and Tim and Allison for organizing this. I mean, I'm so excited that we are doing this, and I really appreciate all of you joining us today to learn more about how to apply to SMFM committees. I think this is something that's really like near and dear to everybody's heart, and people we're so lucky to be in a society where people want to have this interest and want to work hard and participate. So it's really wonderful that all of you joined. This is truly a first for SMFM. First time we've put this on, and we really recognize that people need to know more about how to apply. So that's the sort of purpose behind this, as well as part of SMFM's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusivity. I think for many years, it's people have been wondering, like, how do you pull that curtain away, and how do you really get involved? So this will be hopefully super helpful to give you that information. We, as part of our strategic plan, we really want to expand our outreach and hear from new voices and bring new and fresh perspectives to the committees. So hope that this is helpful. I hope that you consider applying to the committees, and that we're doing our best to support you and your interest and involvement. So thank you so much for being on this webinar today.
Thank you, Joanne, for getting us started. I appreciate it. I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues to introduce themselves.
Thanks, Carrie. And thanks, Joanne, for joining as well. So Tim Heinley, the Senior Director of Membership and Marketing here at SMFM. I work very closely with the leadership and staff liaisons that work on committees around governance within the society. So happy to be here and hopefully give some insight into how to apply for committees and the process behind it.
Hi, and I'm Allison Wainick, the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at SMFM, and I'm just so glad everyone could join us, and we'll shed a little more light on the process for everyone. And just a little bit of housekeeping to sort of kick off the event. For questions today, you can enter them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, not the chat function. And we will be monitoring the Q&A box and try and bring as many questions forward as possible to us, the panelists, during the Q&A portion. And please use the chat function for any technical feedback if you're having any tech issues or anything that we need to be made aware of, and we'll try to address those behind the scenes. And just a note for everybody that we will be recording the webinar and we'll be making it available as soon as possible. And we will be posting it to the committees page of the SMFM website. My hope is by the end of the week, so that we can get this up there and out to as many folks as possible. So if you have any colleagues that aren't able to join today, but are interested in hearing this, we'll be up there. And then we'll also be emailing everybody to let them know that it's up there.
Thanks, Allison. So I just want to get us started with a little bit of background. We're going to jump quickly into the how you apply and where the applications are on the SMFM website. But first, thought it might be helpful to shed some light on why we're doing this webinar and why you might be interested in applying. So Allison, if you could advance to the next slide, please. So you heard Joanne talk a little bit about SMFM's new strategic plan, and hopefully you've seen this graphic on the website or in special delivery. But this was something that our board of directors approved earlier this year. And you see the 3 circles in the center of that graph. I just want to draw your attention to the purple circle, the member engagement and support. That's really why we're here today, to think about how we broaden participation in SMFM as an organization, but certainly our committees, right? The groups that are guiding clinical guidance, who are thinking through some of our policy decisions, and bringing more people into the fold to do that work is something that the board made just a really strong commitment to in this new strategic plan. Next slide. And so we have made some policy changes internally, and these came even before the new strategic plan. And it really was, some of the changes are intended to have more seats at the table. So you might have heard that members can only serve on 1 committee at a time. That's a relatively new change. And again, just something that we put in place so that we aren't seeing the same folks over and over again serving on committees. We also moved to standardizing committee terms. So there are some folks that are, sort of grandfathered into an older system. We heard feedback from the members, right, that they see some of the same names and they see them for long periods of time. And so we moved to this model where we are standardizing terms. So everyone gets 3 years to serve on a committee. If you're brought into a leadership position, a vice chair or a chair of a committee, it may be a little bit longer, but the standard terms are now 3 years. Some of our committees have even been expanded, so there are more seats at the table so that folks who are interested in serving can apply, and there's hopefully more room for folks. And then as part of our selection process, Tim and Allison just do an incredible job of looking at the membership data as a whole, thinking through really all of the elements of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And when we think about diversity, right, that's things like practice setting, that's things like geography, race and ethnicity, gender. And we give the chairs really a snapshot of what the organization looks like as a whole and some guidance around how they can select folks who are applying. And I think the other piece that we've tried to do in recent years and acknowledge we can always be better is really just be transparent about how this process works. We have gotten feedback in the past, that this seems like an old boys club, or folks aren't sure how people land on committees. And so we just want to be really transparent. So we're doing this webinar today. We've also made some upgrades to the SMFM website. So if you go to smfm.org/committees, you can see the list of committee members for each of the committees. And then you can see their role on that group. For some folks, they may be a regular voting member of a committee. Other people may be liaisons from other committees. So if you have questions about seeing people's names in multiple places, I would really encourage you to take a look at that smfm.org or .org/committees. and you can hopefully get a better sense of what each person's role is on that committee. Next slide. And so from your end, hopefully you know this in terms of why you should join, building your CV, really shaping the field of MFM. Hopefully, you connect and network and meet other folks that you might not have had an opportunity to meet with in your regular day-to-day setting. And I will say, committee service has been really important if you're interested in higher levels of leadership within the organization, say the board of directors. When the nominating committee thinks about all of the fantastic folks who are interested in board service, one thing that they look at across the board is, what has this person done previously for the organization? What committee service have they engaged in? So would encourage you, if you're interested in those higher levels of leadership, to apply for a committee. Next slide. So I'm going to turn it over to Tim. He's going to talk a little bit more about who can apply.
Thanks, Carrie. Next slide, please, Allison. So a couple requirements for committee service within SMFM. So you must be an active SMFM member. So as part of committee service, your membership needs to be up to date, and you need to have a membership account with us. So we invite all member types to apply for committees. Yeah, the different eligibility requirements are listed next to each committee, but there's several that they would take any member type from medical student to resident all the way up to our MFM members. So we really are trying to be as most inclusive and transparent in that element as well. As I mentioned, the eligibility requirements vary by committee. So you'll be able to see which member types can apply for which committees listed on the SMFM website. So that's one of the updates Carrie mentioned earlier, just so everybody knows who's eligible to apply for which committees, so that there's no so there's as much transparency as possible. And just to give as many folks the opportunity as possible, we limit the application to 3 committees per year. So we're not getting, members apply for all committees just to try to get on one. We really want them to narrow down their committee to what's most interesting to them and what they think they would fit best with. Next slide, please. So this is just a little bit of background on who's eligible to apply for what committees and how you can find that on the SMFM website. So as Carrie mentioned earlier, if you visit smfm.org/committees, you'll be able to see the full list of all the committees, and then each committee that lists the membership types that are eligible to apply. So next slide, please. You can see this. This is a good example of a committee that has a lot of open spots and a lot of availability to membership. This is our communications committee. So when you're scrolling through, you'll be able to see, based on your membership type, can I apply for this committee? Will I be considered? So each committee will have this list of eligible member types. So we encourage you to check that out, find ones that interest you or fit your membership type, and feel free to apply. So this is just a kind of a brief overview of the committees that are open for application. As we've said a couple times, there are some committees that are by appointment only, but you'll be able to see which committees are appointment only and who serves on those. And then other committees that are open application to all those different member types we mentioned. So this is just kind of a list. I think we have one more slide with the additional committees, but again, it can all be found on our committee website. So as you can see, several opportunities, several varying committees with a lot of different, background expertise, and it covers kind of the whole gambit of what we're doing at the society. So next slide, please, Allison. So, and just another reminder, the Foundation for SMFM, which we work very closely with, they also have committees and opportunities available to all members. So we encourage you to check their committees out as well. There's a link on our committee website and through the Foundation website. So there are other additional opportunities outside of SMFM within the Foundation that we encourage you to apply for as well. How do you apply? So this is a question that comes up often, and we kind of handle internally, but we want to be, again, as transparent as possible and give all the details on how to apply. So next slide, please. So again, you must be an SMFM member. You can log into your account on the website. There's several ways you can get to information about the committees, but as Carrie mentioned, the smfm.org/committees. If you go within your, under the About Us tab on the website, you'll see a link to committees. Within your member profile, there's also a tab for all the committees that are available. So a bunch of different ways to get to the committee listings and areas to apply for them as well. So again, just a couple screenshots to make everybody, aware of where these things can be found. On the About Us, the drop down, the committees is it's the bottom link. As we've mentioned several times, you must be an SMFM member and you must be logged into your account to apply for committees. So if you have any issues accessing your member account, you can contact us. We're happy to help you with that, and happy to help you through the application process as well. Next slide. So all the SMFM committees are listed there. Below the eligible committees, you'll see a button that says Apply Now. So if there's no button that says Apply Now, that's one of several reasons. One, you may not be an eligible member type. Two, it may not be open for application. Or three, you may have already applied for the committee. So after you apply for the committee, this button goes away. So keep in mind the different eligibility requirements, whether or not you've already applied, and reading the details of the committee to see if it's an open application or if it's by appointment only. So as I mentioned, there's a couple reasons if you don't see the apply button, it may not be accepting applications or you've already applied. If you feel like you're not seeing something that you think you should be eligible for, again, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to look into it further. But there's several ways to kind of mitigate that and find out if you've applied to the committee or if you're even eligible to serve on it. Next slide, please. So here's just a good snapshot to if you're having issues, you're not sure if you're allowed to apply or if already applied. This is a screenshot of under your account in your member profile. There's a committees tab where you can see all the committees listed there. So in this case, you see the committee, Practice Management Advisory Board. That's a committee this individual is currently serving on. They joined in 2020. This person has applied for 2 additional committees and their status is pending. So you can see over on the left, if the buttons aren't there for those committees, it's because they've already applied. Or for example, something like the executive committee, which is appointment only, there won't be an apply button, but we still want to show all the membership who's serving on these committees in case they're curious about who's on the executive committee or who's on some of these other appointed only committees. So this is a great place to see kind of your snapshot of your committees and your status. Next slide. So once you've gone ahead and applied for a committee, there'll be a pop-up box that confirms your email address and phone number. So that's basically information that we would need to reach out to potential applicants for one way or another. So once you've hit apply and you hit save, what that will do is that will note that you've applied for that committee. It'll show up as pending in your committee tab, and then you'll be redirected to complete a short questionnaire. The questionnaire is, they're all specific to the committees based on the work of the committee and the needs. There is some standardization around just basic demographic data we collect, but then there's individual questions that help us identify the most qualified folks to serve on the committees. Next slide. As mentioned right before, not all committees have the same questions. Again, based on the need and the work of the committees, the questions will vary. So be sure to take note of those and answer them as complete as possible. That's really kind of the final, between that and your CV, those are the ways that we identify potential new applicants that can be assigned to committees. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick sample of one of the committee questionnaires. So at the top, you'll see kind of some of the language around the committee, instructions on how to complete your questionnaire, and then more details on our commitment to diversity and inclusion and some of the other work specific to that committee. Again, just some of the basic information we'll collect during the process. It probably takes about 10 minutes to fill out the standard committee application, but be sure to be as thorough as possible when filling out your applications. There are options to skip questions or not answer specifics, but really during the evaluation process, we want to get as much information as you're willing to share with us.
Thanks, Tim. So for just referring to what Dr. Stone spoke about before, SMFM is committed to diversity, equity, inclusion, and that's in all its forms. So when we refer to diversity, equity, inclusion, that's referring to gender, race, ethnicity, national origin, religion, socioeconomic status, disability, practice location, practice type, sexual orientation or identity, age and culture, and really everything that sort of runs the gamut, both within our membership and especially in our leadership. And so we really are trying to evaluate where folks are applying from, their background, everybody that's applying for committees, what our committees look like, what our leadership looks like, what our membership looks like. And so in order to do that, we have to be able to sort of hold up the mirror and look at all of our pools of applicants. And so that's why we are asking the demographic questions. And this is actually the second year that we're doing this. And so you will see some demographic questions included on applications this year. So in order for us to sort of gather this data, we hope that folks will answer the questions. Now we do provide the ability to opt not to identify, but we do hope that folks will choose to identify. So the questions and the reply options were developed in conjunction with the Diversity and Inclusion in the Workforce Committee. They use the 2020 census as a framework for the questions and the reply options. And we've also received some feedback from members over the last 2 years that have also helped to shape the questions and the response options. We do require replies, as I said, to the demographic questions. Along with the opt not to identify option, we do also understand that there may be times where respondents feel that the checkboxes that are there may not accurately represent or reflect their personal identity. So we do also have write-in options as well. And so these are the demographic questions sort of collated all in one place for folks to see. And they sort of run the gamut of a variety of different demographic questions, from gender identity and pronouns to ethnic and racial identity, as well as disability, age, geographic region, and healthcare affiliation. And then I've also just captured a few screen grabs here of the SurveyMonkey questions, so you can see both what some of the checkboxes look like, as well as some of the write-in options. And then for some, obviously, we don't necessarily provide write-in options for things like age, but we do have prefer not to answer. And then for any of our international members who are applying, obviously we have the option to write in what country you are living in, so that we can capture that information as well, professional status and healthcare affiliation. And then I'll pass over to Tim for our conflict of interest category.
Thanks, Allison. So as part of committee service, we do require members complete a very brief conflict of interest form that is 4 questions, and that gets reviewed by committee chairs if there's any conflicts that may need to be addressed. So this can also be found in your member profile, as well as members will be prompted to complete this upon submitting their questionnaires. So there's multiple ways to get to the conflict of interest form, and we also double check that all applicants complete that before committee service eligibility. Next slide, please. So again, this is just one of the areas that you can find forms and disclosures within your membership profile. There's also a drop down under your account, and there are links in the confirmation emails and provided following the submission of the questionnaire form. So multiple ways to complete the conflict of interest form, and you can update that at any time if you have any changes to your status. This is just kind of a brief overview of the reasons that we need the conflict of interest forms and how it's required for committee service as well. Next slide.
Sure. And then also new for this year, we have a couple of employment questions. So the last 3 questions on the form are really sort of employment questions about your status at an institution, your eligibility for rehire, and then of course, whether all of your application questions, your answers are true. So that really runs the gamut of, and this says, questions 17, 18, 19, and that's not the number of application questions on your individual, each committee's individual. It also depends on how many questions are on, if the publications committee may have different number of questions based on their individual questions and then their form questions for demographics, et cetera. So the number of questions may vary by committee, but the number of questions for demographic questions and then employment questions, et cetera. These are 3 of the employment questions. So that sort of runs the gamut here. And then, so obviously the deadline for applications are due Thursday, September 15th, 2022. And our selections are made by October 15th, 2022. Happens to fall on a Saturday, so it's really Friday, October 14th. And we expect that notifications will be given within a week of that October 14th. So just to keep that in mind for timeline. So you may be wondering what happens between September 15th and October 15th. And again, to sort of walk you through that. So the committee chair and committee members and also the staff liaisons, there are a number of staff that work with committees and committee chairs. They review all of the applicants and alternates, and those selections are based on the qualifications and the skill sets of those applying, along with diversity and inclusion. And again, going back to that means what is their healthcare affiliation, which region of the US or which country do you practice in, disability, age, race, ethnicity, gender. So really, again, running the gamut of diversity and inclusion, trying to create a really whole and balanced picture and snapshot for the committee. And then also to provide an opportunity for us staff liaisons to sort of sync up and understand, because since folks aren't allowed to sit on more than one committee at a time, we need to make sure that folks aren't overlapping. So it gives us an opportunity to also make sure that there's no duplication, again, in the interest of trying to bring new and fresh and diverse perspectives, so we don't have any overlap. So that's really what takes place between September 15th and October 15th. And then again, the notifications will go out it's usually from committee chairs to those who are selected to sit on committees and those who are not. And then I think I'll pass it over to Carrie for our FAQ section.
Yeah, we get questions and we're seeing some of these come in through the Q&A box too. And so I certainly want to address some of these common questions that we get from folks. One, I've applied so many times, or I've applied and didn't get on a committee. Should I try it again? The short answer is yes. We have a very limited number of slots on each committee. And for some committees, and I'll call out a few specifics, the publications committee, for example, patient safety and quality. There have been years where we've gotten more than 100 applications for those particular committees with, say, 3 or 4 or 5 open slots. And so it is very common, even among, so I say, board members and kind of highest levels of leadership, that people do have to apply multiple times before they're selected. And in, the spirit of diversity, right, I can speak to my experience staffing the communications committee. We may have a phenomenal applicant from Texas, but we already have a lot of people on the committee from Texas. And it's really not a reflection of the applicant, but it's trying to balance some of those elements of diversity on the committee more often than not. And so if you've applied before, please, I would encourage you to apply again. If you have any questions about, right, what are some of those more competitive committees, or the flip side of that, right? There are committees that we don't get a lot of applications for, where your odds might be better than, say, the publications committee. We're happy to share some of that data too, so you can sort of best understand what those odds might look like for you. We talked a little bit about this next question. Why do I see the same names over and over? Historically, without a doubt, that has been a problem. And so some of the policy changes that I mentioned earlier were really intended to address that. There are some folks that have not moved out of that like 3-year term limit, but that will be happening, I think, almost universally at our 2023 annual meeting in San Francisco. And so it did take some time to get everyone on these cycles, but we're really close to getting there. And so as we move forward in the future, we certainly intend that it is not the case that you see the same names over and over. We've heard from folks in the past that they've applied and not heard back. If that is you, we apologize for that. I think there are probably instances where email traffic is lost between staff and members, or between committee chairs and members. At any point, if you've got questions about your application, if you think you applied but aren't like totally sure, if you think you should have heard something and you haven't, I would just encourage you to reach out to the staff liaison. All of those liaisons are listed at smfm.org/committees. And so you can see who the staff point of contact is. Feel free to check in with them if you've got any questions about your status, or if you're in a situation where, say, you think you should have heard something and have not yet heard back. The next question, do some committees operate outside the described process? Yes, there are those. We talked a little bit about this, but if you don't see that apply button on the committee webpage, that may be one of those committees. Committees like our finance committee, our nominating committee, our executive committee, just those are a few examples that do operate outside the described process. And so for those committees, at this point, membership is something that is selected by the executive committee or the board of directors. And so those are appointed slots. And again, there are certainly committees that are more popular than others. And we're happy on the staff side to share those with you. If you're thinking about, perhaps 3 committees that you want to apply to, we can walk through that with anyone on the phone individually and answer those questions as well. Next slide. And so really would just encourage you, if you have not served on an SMFM committee before, encourage you to apply. Even if you've applied before, please, it's going to take a while in some instances. If you have trainees or other folks that you think might be good, would encourage you to ask them to apply too. We are always here as staff to answer questions, demystify the entire process, but we want to be here to help. So if you have questions at any point, you can come to Allison, Tim, or myself, or the staff liaisons listed on the website. Next slide. We will open it up for questions here momentarily, but I do want to flag one new opportunity that is not listed on the website right now. So look for more information on this one in the coming months. But this is an annual meeting task force. Hopefully most of you got an email on Friday announcing some changes to future annual meeting cities. And the board has made some decisions recently based on restrictions related to abortion and moving annual meeting sites. And now, it's really time for us to get some feedback from the membership. And so we will open up an opportunity for folks. Again, it'll be similar in the sense that you'll have to apply, but it'll be an annual meeting task force. It will be time limited, so the group will just probably gather several times with the idea that they'll provide some recommendations to the board as the board of directors thinks about developing a policy, not just for our annual meeting, but some of our smaller regional courses. So look for some more information about that. It is not listed on the website now, but we hope by the end of the year or maybe early next year, we'll do a call for that task force. Next slide. And so now we want to open it up for questions. Tim and Allison, I'm not sure if we've seen anything in the Q&A box while I've been talking, but I think there are some common themes that we're seeing there, and so want to make sure that we address those.
Sure. Carrie, one question came up, and I think it was around the committees that don't have that are appointed, I guess, and how those folks get appointed to those committees. So thinking about the process behind that and how it could be different for each committee. Just wanted to, understand the transparency around appointment only opportunities.
Sure. Joanne, can I call on you? You've been in a position as the president, I think probably most recently, to appoint the nominating committee, but maybe you could shed some light on that process for folks.
Sure. So there are certain committees that are appointed. So for example, the executive committee of the board is appointed by the new members appointed by the current president, the past president, and the president-elect. And that's how they've had to serve on the board in the past. And that's how they get on that. And then the program committee is also selected by the current president of SMFM. It typically is a new board member, but it's not always that way. And then the other ones are the finance committee, so people who have experience in finance, and the nominating committee are people who, again, have experience in leadership roles. And those are the main ones that are not, where it's not open for nomination.
Thanks, Joanne. And I think just to tag on to what you've said, say with the nominating committee, for example, right? You're still, as the board or executive committee identifies those folks, right? Still having those elements of DEI in mind too, so that we're getting a good balance of folks from different parts of the country and different practice settings, sort of all of the things that we've addressed with some of the other committees.
Yeah, and I will add also, you'll see, we're typically there are sub task force or work groups that are, come up throughout the year as there are certain needs, and we'll be for the first time opening up a task force. We'll send it out after the committee nominations are all in, so we're not overwhelming our staff, but we thought we would open that up as well to the membership to volunteer to serve on a task force regarding meetings and things like that. So look out for that in the future, but again, it's just another way that we are trying to reach out to our membership as a whole to give more opportunities for involvement.
Thanks, Joanne.
Carrie, a couple other questions came in. I think this is a common theme as well. And we may need to follow up or maybe just provide some more information on the committee website, getting an idea of the committees, the number of applicants and the competitiveness of committees. So back in the middle of our slide presentation, we outlined all the different committees that were available to apply to and the number of open seats. But a question that's come up is, as Carrie mentioned, on some of the committees like publications or patient safety and quality, the applicant pool is often very large in those committees with maybe only a couple open spots. So, we're working on ways to help members identify committees that they would be eligible for and maybe have a better chance to serve on based on the number of applicants and competitiveness. So we have heard that theme. It's common, and as part of some of the updates we make to the website and the listing of committees, we'll be able to outline a little better which committees you may want to focus your efforts on.
Thanks, Tim. And I would just say, if anyone wants to talk through, some of those committees with us, we've gotten a few questions in the chat about particular skill sets that you might have, or, expertise that you bring to the table. Any one of us is happy to talk through some recommendations about maybe what would be a good fit for your skill set or your area of clinical expertise. And so, please feel free to reach out to any one of us and we can help guide you to kind of some of the committees that are existing and how you could contribute on those. We got another question in the chat here, which I think is a really good one, about time commitment and expected frequency of meetings in the committee descriptions. I think that's a great suggestion and one we can certainly bring back. There are committees, as folks might imagine, that meet more regularly than others. There are committees that only do, say, Zoom or virtual calls at different points during the year, and others that meet in person. And so I think we can certainly bring that feedback to our colleagues to make that more transparent in terms of time commitment. I will speak to a few of the committees I staff, and then maybe Tim and Allison, you could do the same in terms of time commitment. For folks that are on the call right now, I staff the research committee and the communications committee. Both of those groups meet virtually exclusively. My hope is that when we're together in person in San Francisco, we'll have an opportunity at the annual meeting to have some sort of in-person gathering. It may not be a formal committee meeting, but at least a way for us to connect in person. But those committees, I would say, meet somewhere in the ballpark of 6 times a year, but most of the work is really done via email. And so the time commitment for the actual meetings, let's say approximately 6 hours a year. And, like anything, it's what you put into it. So if you come to the committee with an idea, say, about a new paper, let's say you serve on the research committee, right? Are you going to be the lead author on that paper? You're going to put some more time into writing, right? Maybe it's not your area of interest or expertise, so you take a back seat and let your colleagues step up and serve in that role. You may have times where it's less of a time commitment. That is not how all of the committees operate, though. And so, Allison, maybe I can call on you next to talk a little bit about how the Diversity and Inclusion in the Workforce Committee operates.
Great, thanks. So yes, for the D&I and the Workforce Committee, we meet once a month in the evening for about an hour. But we do have some subcommittees that do some other work. So for instance, same as Carrie, perhaps there's a subgroup that's working on a paper. Last year, coming out of committee, we had one paper on anti-racism, and another paper which became a special statement on clinical best practices for treating sexual and gender minority patients. So some of those were emails and phone calls that were some additional work. So if folks are looking to sort of take the lead and be established as, key opinion leaders in that space, it's a little more work. Also, we do put on a special interest group on anti-racism. So coordinating that, was a little bit more work for the folks that were involved in that. And if maybe members wanted to, put forth a PG course, which was of their own accord, but sometimes smaller groups sort of form, I think it would depend on the amount of effort, commitment, and excitement that folks have around the topics that we discuss. But largely the commitment is at least 1 hour a month, and then I would say other duties as interested.
Thanks, Allison. Yeah, in my experience, I staff the Membership and Bylaws Committee and the Fellowship Affairs Committee, and meet anywhere from 4 to 6 times a year, as Carrie and Allison mentioned, hour-long meetings virtually for all the committees. And the work within the committees varies, quite a bit. The Fellowship Affairs Committee has a lot going on to support all of the fellow activities throughout the year, whether it's at our in-person meetings or fellowship retreat or any other activities to support the fellows. And there's a lot of opportunity there to work on. We've talked several times about smaller work groups or task force within the committee to work on these different things. So kind of echo what Carrie mentioned earlier, you can get out what you put into the committees. I would really encourage, if you are selected for committees, especially in your first year, to be as active and present as possible. It's really important especially in the virtual environment when we may not get to meet as often as we'd like, but really making sure to attend your meetings, or at least, get to know everybody on the committee and be as responsive as possible through email or on meetings, because that really kind of sets the tone for kind of committee, your committee work. And as much as your schedule allows, try to do as much as you can to be active and involved, I would say. So not overwhelming time commitment on my committees, but lots of opportunity to be as involved as you want to be. So I think that's my experience.
It seems like the questions are, we're not seeing a lot more in the Q&A box. We'll keep it open here for another few minutes in the event folks have a question or need clarification. I would say there are committees that do meet in person. They may have a multi-day meeting in sort of a pre-pandemic environment. And so there are committees, right, that would meet for multiple days in person and have more frequent calls. And so, to the extent we can, we'll try to spell that out on the website moving forward, because I think that's really important to be able to gauge what might be a good fit for you.
And just also a reminder for our international members who may be on the call, certainly keep an eye out for committees that interest you and for which you're eligible. That we encourage international members to apply. And if you have any questions and you're sort of curious about what that might look like, or this is your first time applying, certainly feel free to reach out and ask any questions. And we, that's one of the things that we're also very interested in encouraging this year. So certainly feel free to reach out, shoot an email, a message over, and we'll be happy to answer any questions. We have a question. What is the Documentation Review Committee? Carrie or Tim, if you want to field that one.
Sure, I'm happy to take that question. The Document Review Committee is part of the process by which SMFM publishes our work in AJOG. And so, for example, Allison mentioned the Diversity in the Workforce Committee last year had some interest in some expertise around gender minority patients. And so they put together a set of recommendations. And so there may be individual authors on a committee that work on that. And in terms of the approval process, then that gets taken to the broader committee for feedback, which is incorporated into that document. And then the document goes to the document review committee. So this is, these are folks who have not been involved in the development of the manuscript itself, but people with various expertise in MFM. And so they can look at the document almost as like an outside reviewer. And so if there is significant feedback, that document would go back to the committee for consideration. And following the document review committee process, the document will go to our SMFM executive committee. So there are numerous layers of review when you think about the content that you see in AJOG with the SMFM logo. It's been developed, sort of by a committee, goes through the document review committee, and then all the way to the highest levels of leadership before it gets published. And so hopefully that answers that question around the document review committee. And maybe sheds a little light for folks who are wondering sometimes why things take a long time to get published. We want to make sure they're right and they're good. And so there's a few layers there that those documents that they go through before they're in AJOG. We really appreciate everyone's time today. Joanne, would love for you to wrap us up.
Yeah, no, I think it's so great to see such engaged members, and thank you to Carrie, to you and Tim and Allison for putting this together. I think, super important to get this message out. We really do want to be transparent about the process and be helpful to you in your application. So again, as Carrie said, don't hesitate to email us any other questions that you may have. And really looking forward to working with many of you in the future. Enjoy your day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.